The plane of Dominaria is one shaped by the heroes and villains who have forged endless stories over its long history. In Dominaria United, legends both old and new continue to define the greatest events of this plane as they work towards their destinies, both for the benefit and detriment of Dominaria. Hello everyone, I'm Simon here for the Aether Hub, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. With Dominaria United fully set to take over the standard environment, many of us have started going through the new legendary creatures of the set and crafting commander decks to utilize them. As I'm sure many of you can attest, some consider more than just the card's text when crafting a commander deck. Many also take into consideration a legendary story. So what then is the lore for all the legendary creatures in Dominaria United? In this video, we will go over each legendary card found in the base set of Dominaria United, explaining their lore, history, and background so that you can become a more well-informed commander crafter. Throughout this video, you'll notice some legendaries may not be included, namely some from the commander sets, which seems a little oxymoronic, but don't worry, they're going to get their own separate video since all their cards are pretty well involved in their own distinct stories. You'll also see that I'm not including Planeswalkers in this video because we've pretty much covered all of their stories in the complete Story of Dominaria United video, which you can find linked on your screen right now or in the description below. And speaking of that video, I want to thank you guys all so much for the success that it had here on YouTube. If you want, please consider checking it out. The video was certainly a labor of love, being over 90 minutes of lore goodness, filling you in on everything that happened in the Dominaria United story, and I really appreciate all the great goodwill that I got from this community on that video, so thank you. While that video covered everything relating to the Dominaria United story proper, this is going to include everything else. This is every legendary in Dominaria United explained. Remember, if you're enjoying the videos here on the Aether Hub, consider supporting our content by leaving this video a like, subscribing, or by becoming a member of the channel, like these fine folks here. The channel members have been instrumental in keeping the content coming. In fact, my old microphone that I had at the very start of this channel finally died, and I was able to buy a new one thanks to your guys' memberships. So I just want to say thank you to the members, and I also want to thank anyone out there considering becoming a member. And now, let's get back to the lore. Aaron Capuchin is head of House Capuchin, one of the most powerful and influential families of Benalia. Benalia is a primarily human region of Dominaria, steeped in tradition and faith to the Sarin Church. Their order is commanded by warrior priests, or paladins, who wear thick, heavy armor depicting stained glass images appropriate for the house that they serve. For the Capuchins, that sigil is their ancestral tower, gilded in 7 different colored windows. Aaron is a distant relative of Jared Capuchin, the hero of Dominaria who led the defense of the plane in the very first Phyrexian invasion, ultimately giving up his life to defeat Yawgmoth. This line was in fact a genetic experiment by the planeswalker Urza, who selectively bred powerful families together in order to create a line of succession resulting in ideal fighters. Aaron and all of his children share the benefits of this genetic journey. As a man of faith, Aaron serves the Church of Serra devoutly, believing in both the mercy of the Planeswalker who founded the church, as well as the hardiness of the angels who continue to carry on her legacy. While keeping the faith, Aaron by no means shies away from a fight, standing as one of the greatest commanders of the Benalish forces. Now in his 40s, he travels to Oyster Bay to join peace talks between his people and the Keldans over a disputed claim of artifacts in contested territory. Though the talks were progressing nicely, Aaron was unaware that Phyrexia had already planted sleeper agents within his personal detail. They interrupted the negotiations and captured Aaron, retreating back to the mountains of Shiv. There, the man Aaron Capuchin used to be was lost forever when the Phyrexian Urte personally attended to the Benalish leader's completion. Though his body was transformed, his mind was left very much human, left conscious to every whim the Phyrexians forced him to obey. An act of unbelievable torture, as well as a psychological attack on all those who look to defy the rise of New Phyrexia. After her father was captured, his daughter Danitha Capuchin took over as head of the Capuchin line and leader of the Benalish Knights. Before that, she was already looked at as a prominent successor to the House Capuchin. She was trained at a young age in both combat and diplomacy, showing great skill in both negotiations as well as swordplay. In our first return to Dominaria, planeswalkers and heroes were looking to stop the rise of the evil Cabal and their dark master, the demon lord Belzenlok. With the Cabal's resurgence, Jaya looked to add a Capuchin to her new crew upon the skyship Weatherlight, having had a good relationship with this family in the past, befriending Jared Capuchin during the first Phyrexian invasion. However, Danitha was leading Benalia's forces at home, guiding warbands against Cabal circles spreading through their lands, and couldn't leave them without leadership. Her brother, Raf Capuchin, took her place aboard the Weatherlight. With word of her father's capture by Phyrexian agents, Danitha immediately coordinated efforts to track the enemy and find Aaron Capuchin. Working alongside the planeswalkers Jaya and Ajani, they discovered Aaron was being held within the caves of Shiv. She led the effort and plotted the attack of the cave, successful in driving out Urte with her already completed father. Despite efforts to control his now corrupted body, Aaron Capuchin was ordered to attack his own daughter. Danitha dodges his blows as they're sluggish and jerky as if he fought against his own actions. Aaron whispered to Danitha to do her duty. Following Benalish law, she did, and beheaded her father, ending his suffering. She has gone on to succeed Aaron Capuchin as head of the House Capuchin and leader of Benalia. Rafwin Capuchin, aka Raf, is a young, arrogant mage of House Capuchin of Benalia, son of Aaron and brother of Danitha. Raf at a young age aspired to live up to the legacy of his family name, choosing not martial prowess but pursuing the magical arts, becoming a powerful mage worthy of the Capuchin name. Studying the discipline of illusion magic at the prestigious Tolaria West, Raf quickly made a name for himself both with his skill and the swagger it inspired. But he also never forgot the position he held within the ruling family of Benalia and their history of heroism on Dominaria. In trying to live up to that expectation, Raf dreamed of boarding his ancestor's skyship, Weatherlight, and riding in defense of the plane. He would eventually get his chance with the rise of the Cabal on Dominaria, as Jaya set out to find a new crew for the restored Weatherlight in the fight against Belzenlok. Her first choice may have been Raf's sister, Danitha, but in her refusal, Raf stepped forward to offer his magic as well to live out his dream. Despite being relatively untested, his skill wasn't in question, and he ended up proving himself time and time again as a capable mage aboard the Weatherlight. With Phyrexia again making an appearance on Dominaria, Raf, as a mage of the Weatherlight, assisted the crew in smuggling equipment, fighters, and information across regions for the new coalition. He was aboard the ship as they disguised the vessel with Phyrexian debris in an attempt to obscure their presence while flying through Phyrexian territory. It had the unintended consequence of completing the Weatherlight, forcing Raf and the others to abandon the legendary skyship. Tori is a cavalry knight from the lands of Avenant, which is located at the top of Benalish territory. In the past, these two regions had a rocky relationship at best, resulting in conflicts, but more often just a cold reception between the two kingdoms. As an island nation, their stubbornness was legendary, but their most important commodity were its archers and cavalry riders known as the Fury Riders. In modern days, the island has since rejoined the Benalish kingdom as the 7th Great House, its sigil being 7 crossed arrows, symbolizing their renowned bowmen. Though the Avenant often loose arrows on enemies, they too are comfortable serenading their friends. Poetry is taught readily to every citizen of the island, especially their famed archers, so that each bolt shot is guided by a fragment of verse, each volley a brilliant piece of poetry. With the return of Phyrexia on Dominaria, the Avenant have sent their forces to aid Benalia in the war effort, namely the cavalry known as the Fury Riders, as they have led the vanguard in a number of offenses, with the tip of that spear often being a young rider named Tori. Tori was born with a rare degenerative disease that robbed her of the use of her legs. This would have normally made riding impossible, but Tori was so determined that she learned to ride with a special saddle as well as a specially trained horse and managed to best many other riders her age. Now she rides with a fury and relentlessness not seen in many from her island. Fearless of spears or Phyrexian horrors, Tori has crushed through enemy lines and broken the ranks of New Phyrexia. Granddaughter of the barbarian Keldan warlord Aster, Rada is a large, muscular woman with a fighter's spirit. She has the gray, ashen skin of the Kelds, along with the ears and markings of her elvish ancestry. Rada's history on Dominaria is a long and complex one, having rescued the plane both by her actions and as a hostage. She was recognized by the planeswalker Teferi as a being who had the potential to become a planeswalker herself. She had an unignited spark residing within her. With that, it offered Radha unique power despite not fully being a planeswalker yet. This power would come in handy during the Time Rift crisis on Dominaria, as rifts in time and space threatened to destroy not only the plane, but the entire multiverse. Her latent spark was used as a tool to close these rifts, and as a result, her spark was lost forever. Her anger and rage threatened to consume her soul, the barbarian spirit overtaking any sense of rational thought. But in journeying across Dominaria, saving people and closing rifts, she gained a new perspective, and a compassion for more than just herself. She would eventually go back to Keld and claim her ancestors' position as warlord of the barbaric people. But these were times of peace, and the Kelds don't do peace very well. Luckily, a conflict against the demonic cult, the Cabal, was ramping up and Radha had a new enemy to smash. She was somehow captured by the enemy and forced to fight in their arena pits, which she was of course extremely good at. That is, until she was rescued and led the efforts of expelling the Cabal from Dominaria, cementing her place as Grand Warlord. It was Radha who represented her people at the peace talks between the Kelds and Benalia, looking to quell aggressions between the two kingdoms. It was here that Radha witnessed the coming of Phyrexia when sleeper agents attacked the negotiations. Realizing the stakes of this threat, Radha led the Kelds in various conflicts across Dominaria, including at the climactic battle of the Mana Rig, where she took up command of the entire new coalition in the Mana Rig's defense. She even managed to single-handedly stab out a Dreadnought's eye, taking out the giant Phyrexian war machine. With the Phyrexians claiming victory but ultimately retreating, Radha returns to Keld with a new title and the respect of everyone who joined the new coalition. Aster is an ancient hero of Dominaria's past, a brave but savage Keldan barbarian who led his people to some of the most important victories in the plane's history. As the youngest warlord to unite Keld, Aster was destined for greatness as he was trained with both the physical dominance of the Keld and the quick cunning of the neighboring and often warring nation of Argive. Though many in Aster's young life wanted to pull him either closer to strength or wits, the young warlord experienced a vision from Keld's very first leader, who prophesied that he would need to balance both to guide their people through the Keldan twilight, their doomsday. It was foretold that during a glorious battle for Keld's survival, the ancient dead champions of their people would rise up for the final climactic war to end all things. The bones of their greatest warriors lied within the Keldan necropolis, and the battle would occur during Aster's rule, as the Phyrexians invaded Dominaria for the first time. As the Wrathy overlay began, Phyrexian forces besieged and took control over the necropolis. Aster responded, now banding with the Elves of Skyshroud who joined them in the fight. The battle was indeed apocalyptic, and the prophecy was fulfilled, as the Keldan dead rose to join the fray, only they sided with their undead Phyrexian allies. Aster begrudgingly committed the greatest act of blasphemy, and slew his undead ancestors. There was a silver lining, however, as their ancient longboat, the Golden Argosy, appeared and rescued the Kelds and Elves who were nearing defeat. It's a boat of legend that soars through the sky and would appear at the Keldan twilight to ferry its champions. At the final battle in Urborg, Aster fought with dwarves, Minotaur, elves, and Metathran to avenge the legacy of his resurrected kin. They managed to storm the final stronghold of Phyrexia on Dominaria, just before Yawgmoth himself managed to use a portal to sweep death across the plane. Aster again escaped imminent death, this time on the skyship Weatherlight, but was unable to fight the god of Phyrexia directly. After the first Phyrexian invasion ended with Yawgmoth's death, Aster returned to ruling his lands as warlord, but now taking a Skyshroud elf as a mate. While the rest of his rule is lost to history, his bones were laid to rest within the necropolis with his ancestors. But this later was found to be untrue when the necropolis was investigated by his granddaughter, the latest warlord of Keld, Radha, who only found his famous twin blades, but no body. In reality, after Keld was saved from the Phyrexian invasion, Aster boarded the Golden Argosy and drifted into an incorporeal dimension, being suspended in time until Dominaria again faced another twilight. The ancient longboat was again called to this reality with the second Phyrexian invasion, and Aster along with it, having been in suspended animation, not aging physically, in all of that time. Again, Aster fights his ancient foe, and learns that his line still lives on as warlord through his granddaughter Radha. Warlord Rada has done a great many things for Keld, revolutionizing the culture and ideals of their society, merging their bloodthirsty history with compassion and diplomacy that would ensure Keldan survival in an ever-changing and dangerous Dominaria. Though these modern concepts conceived from elvish blood doesn't represent the true nature of Keld. Some believe it's a perversion of their traditional lifestyle. Garna is the leader of these loud dissenters. Garna, known as the Blood Flame or Blood Fist, is a regional warlord in the western frozen shores of Keld, where traditions run deep, and many have struggled with the more kind-hearted reforms of Rada. Many youths here buck her rule and outwardly challenge the direction Keld is going in, believing that pillaging slaves is a staple of their heritage, and are angry that Rada abolished the practice. Garna has risen as a particularly loud supporter of the old ways of Keld, believing that today's warlord is just too soft, and doesn't appropriately connect to their blood-drenched roots. She's garnered plenty of support, and one day hopes to challenge Rada for the title of Grand Warlord. However, with the Phyrexians attacking, there's plenty of blood spilling and berserking to be done. For common survival, she has directed her ire towards a shared enemy, at least for now. King Darien the 48th is the current king of New Argive, the latest in a long line of rulers who bore this name before him. As a nation, New Argive is known as the strongest and most united military across all of Dominaria. Their technological advancements set them apart on the plane. They have continued to utilize and study ancient discarded Thran tech to bolster their cities and defensive capabilities. They use old power stones as a source of energy, fueling their various clockwork mechanisms, bridges, towers, and castles. New Argive was birthed in the union of two once feuding peoples, the Balduvians and the Keldorans. These nations that sprung up during the Ice Age both controlled regions locked on a landmass surrounded by glaciers. Balduvia was a nation of barbarians that resided within the mountain passes between the ice. While mainly living a nomadic lifestyle, they were fierce hunters and warriors, keeping few permanent settlements, but primarily living very wild lives. While living in this same harsh environment, the Keldor built strong, more established cities, following a strict code of conduct and hammering out a sense of civilization during the coldest period of Dominaria history. The King of Keldor, Darien I, managed to form a powerful alliance with his former enemies. Common ideals of the two people remained strong, and their alliance was formalized with a wedding. This marital tie was pushed for by the Archmage Eternal, Joda, as a means to ensure strength in the region without needing to resort to short-term treaties. With Joda as a mediator, King Darien I of Keldor had his daughter wed to the son of the Balduvian chieftain Lovisa Coldeyes, and thus the nation of New Argive was born. The current King Darien, the 48th descendant of King Darien I, was known more for his isolationism and fear. When hints of a Phyrexian invasion reached him, the king wanted to close up his gates and have his people ride out the invasion in safety. It was only after strong counsel from his loyal and beloved advisor, Baird, did King Darien the 48th decide to steel himself and made New Argive one of the first nations to stand against New Phyrexia. Sadly, with sleeper agents infecting New Argivian citizens, even those holding powerful ranks at court, completion spread quickly throughout the kingdom. New Argive was one of the first casualties in Phyrexia's second invasion of Dominaria, a fate King Darien the 48th couldn't prevent. Baird is the paragon of New Argivian culture, a steward for his culture and his people. He is the finest example of New Argivian morality, martial skill, and education. A member of the kingdom's noble warrior class, Baird has been tasked with watching out for all potential threats that could impede the people of New Argive. To that end, he has studied the land, its enemies, and its history. He is one of the most well-educated people in New Argive, giving him a unique perspective of potential dangers from Dominaria's past, like the Phyrexians. Being a keen observer and learned man, Baird was one of the first to see the subtle signs of the new Phyrexian invasion, picking up on the most minute of changes to the land and its people, and piecing them from accounts of the first Phyrexian invasion that decimated Dominaria. He encouraged his king to investigate these warning signs, successfully advising the king to pursue an effort to expose Phyrexian sleeper agents. With New Argive fallen to New Phyrexia, Baird has pledged his sword to the new coalition in defense of Dominaria, looking to exact justice during his homeland's darkest hour. Sten, the heir to a long and prestigious noble Argivian line, was handpicked by King Darian the 48th to root out potential Phyrexian sleeper agents no matter the cost. To aid him in these efforts, the ruthless and zealous Sheoldred was sent on Sten's command to the far mountainous regions to seek out Phyrexian corruption, which was done in brutal fashion. Acting as a sly informant for his king, Sten managed to seek an audience with the Archmage Eternal Jaya as he led peace negotiations between the Keld and Benalia. He used the guise of a new Argivian mediator to infiltrate the talks, searching for potential Phyrexians among these two nations. While appearing to be stoutly against the Phyrexians, Sten was already completed and was a sleeper agent himself. This goes to show that those who have been completed don't actually realize their fate until their status is activated by Phyrexia. Sten genuinely was looking to root out sleeper agents, while his actions were always within the hands of the enemy. It was Sten who guided the planeswalkers Jaya, Teferi, Karn, along with the mage Jaya, to his watchtower in New Argive. Once Karn seemingly revealed the location of the Silex, a sought-after device for the Phyrexians, his sleeper agent status was triggered much to Sten's own horror. Sten, the completed, was defeated by Dominaria's heroes, but his corruption was what likely brought about the doom of New Argive. Leading the new Argivian armies doesn't solely fall on the shoulders of Baird. Others survived the collapse of this great kingdom and carry its fading spark with them into battle, such as the brilliant tactician Balmor. Balmor isn't a New Argive native, rather flying to this city from his home of Oteria, where most Aven of Dominaria hail. Dominarian Aven, like others throughout the multiverse, come in a variety of subspecies that dominate their appearance. Most of this plane are eagle-like in appearance, with their striking raptor features representative of their war-hungry demeanors. Balmor is one such Aven. Some, however, are owl-like in appearance, though owl Aven on Dominaria are typically more passive and scholarly than their eagle cousins. Balmor, however, seems to have a bridging personality between these two subsects. As typical of his eagle appearance, Balmor is a gifted warrior, but he's also flown to and studied at the various different Tolarian academies across Dominaria, leaving him a virtual well of knowledge when it comes to tactics and spellcraft. But that's not to say that Balmor only takes an advisory role within the war efforts. Balmor is captain of the guard and leads a band of Aven battle mages known as the Firefeathers. He fervently defends the city he has come to love, soaring into battle and raining down magic upon the Phyrexian horde. Tura is a Sky Knight of New Argive. Her line, the Kennerud family, have a long history of mounting giant birds into combat. It's a practice that dates back to the old kingdom of Keldor, when her ancestors struggled for survival against the harsh cold of Dominaria's Ice Age, as well as the deadly machinations of the necromancer Limdal, who terrorized their lands. Sky Knights fly upon the backs of Aether, giant eagles with razor-sharp talons and beaks that evolved in the frigid temperatures of the northern forests. They were slowly trained over generations by the first Keldor riders, who eventually developed a method to bond with the creatures, so that rider and bird could communicate without the use of words or other physical commands. Their agility, dexterity, and maneuverability make them some of the fiercest mounted knights in all of Dominaria. Before Keldor became New Argive, Arna Kennerud was the most renowned Sky Knight to take flight over a frozen Dominaria. She lived during a time known as the Thaw, just as the Ice Age was coming to an end, and new threats began to emerge from the snow. She led the Sky Knights, accompanying the ground forces of Keldor against the necromancer Limdal until his evil was purged from their lands. She's also known in MTG as having numerous and oftentimes hilarious quotes on cards' flavor text. Since those days, the climate has warmed significantly, and their original breed of Aether have gone extinct. Still, a new breed of bird that evolved along with the increasing temperature persisted, meaning the honorable Sky Knights remained as a staple, even as Keldor formed to make New Argive. Now, a young Tura hopes to prove she is more than just another in a long line of Kennerud. She even rides atop a distant descendant of her relative's ancient bird, boldly joining the new coalition and the fight against New Phyrexia. Below the waves in the depths of Dominaria's seas, there's no people more feared and respected than the Merfolk of the Voldalian Empire, now led by the great Emperor Mihail II. Vodalia, a territory that spans the Voda Sea, lays claim to one of the most profitable merchant routes in all of Dominaria. The Voldalian Merfolk claim these waterways and exact a toll on ships who pass through them, payment for protection and the promise of a safe journey. Because of this practice, the Voldalian Empire has grown quite rich and powerful, being the primary civilization for Merfolk of Dominaria. Though Voldalia hasn't always enjoyed such prosperity, early in their dynasty, the Merfolk were almost wiped out by rampaging Homerids. After clawing their way back from oblivion, the Merfolk regularly got into open conflict with races of the surface world, those who disrespected their domain or those who sought control of the seas themselves. There's always existed some tension between Merfolk and those who dwell on land. When Phyrexia first invaded Dominaria and Yawgmoth appeared on the plain, most of Vodalia was wiped out, including much of the elite military members who made up the most influential class in Merfolk society. Their civilization was primarily rebuilt by the survivors, the more educated and artistic among them, who were separated to a deep trench away from the main city, in a way protecting them from Yawgmoth. While these more diplomatic Merfolk have gained control of government and focus more on trade and mercantile agreements, there are others who wish to do more against the surface dwellers. Young, militant, and brash, they push to clear the coastlines of landwalkers and seize control of ports to more easily regulate sea travel by those deemed undesirable. In Voldalian culture, the caste system is strictly followed, and one's caste can become part of their name. Emperor Mihail is a Stoverode, a member of the more traditional and martial aristocrat caste, who now uses his strong military training and leadership to guide the Merfolk during its time of division. As a new Phyrexian invasion has threatened the stability of the surface realm, many have called for the Emperor to order coastal attacks, but Mihail is resistant, not looking to push a realm already close to breaking over the edge. Tatyova is a merfolk of the Voda Sea and a devout student of druidism beneath the waves. She has learned to channel the tides, the wind, and even storms. She can shift sediment and bring fresh water, cold and full of oxygen, up from the deepest trenches of Dominaria to serve her people in the Voldalian Empire. Though the call from the sea was strong, enticing Tatyova to learn its magical secrets, there was too another voice that whispered to her. It too was full of life and possibility, but it came from the forests found on land. She traveled to the great groves of Yavimaya, where the giant trees found roots in rivers, estuaries, and even the sea itself. The great abundance of life here beckoned her to learn of the forest's secrets as well, and with those secrets came great knowledge and power, as she could now practice magic in both realms of nature, land and sea. Tutored by some of the greatest druids of the Yavimayan Elves, Tatyova returns to her emperor with a new perspective of Dominaria, one that sees a whole, singular natural world, not one divided as her kin so stoutly believe. Her efforts have been instrumental in tempering Emperor Mihail II's more aggressive tendencies, silencing the voices calling for brutal attacks against the surface and preaching an ideal unity between land and sea. She hopes that one day, the Merfolk can serve as defenders of all nature, not just their realm, and stand with others as protectors of Dominaria. Contrasting the likes of Tatyova are those more militant-minded Merfolk calling for retribution against the surface races who have harmed Voldalia in the past. One prominent figure in this movement is Vohar. A young member of the Stoverode, Vohar has always viewed his emperor, Mihail II, with a gaze of jealousy. Though a competent warrior and leader, it was Mihail who had hogged all the glory and solidified his power to become emperor. And what does he do with that power? He placates to the surface dwellers who would see them wiped from Dominaria's seas. In Vohar's glorious rule, he would lead a bloody campaign against the coasts, purging all lives from the shores, once again bringing glory to Voldalia. This delusion, a false prophecy of grandeur, led Vohar and his supporters to attempt a coup and usurp the throne from Mihail II, though their treason was uncovered before blood was spilled. As punishment, the emperor banished Vohar to the abyssal lair of Dominaria's seafloor, a dark, crushing expanse devoid of light and life. In exile in this hell under the waves, Vohar found his redemption, a promise of power. He found the ancient lost remnants of Phyrexia's first invasion of Dominaria. This machine stirred with new life, responding to the call of Sheoldred's latest attack on the plane. The hum of the creature lured Vohar in, and completed him. The power of Phyrexia was now etched throughout his body, and using it, he would destroy Mihail and all other enemies for the glory of New Phyrexia. The Llanowar Elves of Dominaria are no strangers to the struggle of survival, especially against a foe as unrelenting as the Phyrexians. Some believe it's the forest's incredible size that hides and protects the elves of the Llanowar Forest, but it is its vast series of kingdoms, all ruled over by different kings or queens, that had offered the elves resiliency here. Though conflicts between these elf tribes can occur, they are typically friendly, and often band together to face enemies who threaten the forest entire. These tribes are known as Elfheims, and there are 7 found throughout Llanowar. Ruadak is one such tribe, now led by their half-elven queen, Alinal. While some Elfheims can be quite xenophobic towards outside races, Ruadak is rather tolerant, often intermingling with other non-elves, trading and socializing with them. This cultural overlap led to the royal line mixing with humans, one being her father and her mother being the former queen, Tarina. Her line had issues before Alinel was born, when she found that the Prince of Ruadak, her brother, had betrayed their Elfheims' long-established peaceful relationships with humans and slaughtered a family residing in Llanowar. Princess Tarina heard of this and confronted her xenophobic brother, who had just murdered the king, their father. This brother wouldn't ascend the throne because of his crimes, and so Tarina found herself Queen of Ruadak, maintaining the crown for over 400 years until the Phyrexians' first invasion of Dominaria. She felt it was her duty as a kindred spirit of the plane to help defend it, even riding out alongside the Llanowar scouts to join them in battle. Sadly, the beloved queen would die at the hands of the Phyrexians, paving the way for her daughter, Alinal, to take the throne. Alinal has sworn to scrub clear the corruption of Phyrexia wherever it may dwell. With its return to Dominaria during her reign, she may finally have her chance. Miria is the young leader of the Forest Elves found in the dark woods of Yavimaya. Despite her relatively young age for an elf, Miria has proven herself time and time again to be the one the Yavimayan elves turn to when there's trouble. She accomplishes outstanding feats and finds unthinkable solutions to the most troubling of issues for her tribe, all thanks to her ingenuity and curiosity of Dominarian history, which isn't very common for the elves. Learning everything she could about the plane's past, Miria became obsessed with the lost Thran Empire, the greatest technological society to have ever existed on Dominaria. Their artificers crafted unbelievable tools and relics of immense power, such as Power Stones, which have since laid in silent ruin beneath the canopies and soils of Yavimaya. With her creativity, Miria has studied these artifacts and put them to use for her tribe, becoming an artificer in her own right. Though elves are traditionally snobbish when it comes to using foreign technology, there's no doubt that Miria's fascination with the Thran has greatly benefited her people. With Phyrexia once again marching on Dominaria, the Archmage Eternal, Joda, traveled to Yavimaya seeking military alliances with the Elves. He met with Miria, who represented her people, but declined to join the hero in defense of the plane, choosing instead to shore up Yavimaya's own security and protect the Elves. All that changed, however, when a Phyrexian dragon engine burst through the tree line and decimated ancient wood, woodland creatures, and elvish homes within its gaping maw. The dragon engine had burrowed through the ground and broken free an abandoned workshop of the Thran, which Miria quickly spotted useful artifacts. Grabbing a Thran dampening sphere and using a constructed glider to maneuver around the Phyrexian, Miria activated the device and warped the machine into a void of silence, disabling it, as well as its driver, the Phyrexian sympathizer, Rona. After the attack, Miria pledged her support to the new coalition and rode with Joda and her elvish archers atop Magnagoths, giant tree folk, to join Dominaria's defense at the Battle of the Mana Rig against New Phyrexia. We don't have a lot of information on Nael, Avizoa Aeronauts, so let's read directly from her lore spotlight provided by Wizards of the Coast and then add some extra context. Nael was always the curious type, and her curiosity could not be contained by the borders of Yavimaya. As soon as she came of age, she set off to see the world. In her travels, she noticed a flock of strange creatures floating in the sky. Several failed experiments later, Nael found herself soaring above the clouds, a view of Dominaria few get a chance to appreciate. So besides being an ambitious elf with wanderlust, what can we add to Nael's lore? Those strange floating creatures she seemed to have fashioned into a hot air balloon are known as Avizoa, which is the local name for a species of flying jellyfish found throughout Dominaria. Yep, she's literally tied a basket to floating jellyfish in order to travel through the air. Quite ingenious for this young elf, if you ask me. Now, we don't see a lot of jellyfish in MTG, but there are other species that exist out there. The creature type, Avizoa, has been retroactively updated to jellyfish, and that's to match creatures like the Esperzoa and Gomazoa, which are similar creatures found on the plains of Alara and Zendikar respectively. Yep, so she's a jellyfish rider. Squee is probably one of the most, if not the most, famous goblin in MTG lore. His story dates back to the original Phyrexian invasion and the newly formed crew of the skyship Weatherlight as they were out collecting the pieces of the legacy weapon in order to end that threat of Yawgmoth forever. An unlikely ally in this noble effort was a young goblin cabin boy named Squee. While small, unassuming, and frankly annoying, Squee was undoubtedly the best cabin boy the Weatherlight ever had, with the goblin having a crush on the ship's captain, Sisay. However, the jovial youngster would forever be changed when he became captured by the Phyrexians on their artificial staging grounds of the Plane of Wrath. Even the Phyrexians require a little R&R from time to time, even being offered gifts from their god to honor their good work following the doctrine. A special gift would be awarded to Urte, who was leading the invasion campaign on Wrath, altered the body of Squee so that he would be granted immortality. The goblin could not be killed by blade, age, or any other means. Urte's gift was the endless possibilities in which to slaughter Squee, a gift Urte took pleasure in quite often. Again and again, Squee would be ended in ways unimaginable to the mortal mind, only to reform later, ready for more. Though it freed Squee from death, it did nothing to free him from pain. Luckily, throughout his torture, Squee had with him his lucky toy, an ivory sphere with red markings he took from the Weatherlight that gave him some small comfort. As it happens, Squee's toy may actually be lucky, as luck would always find the goblin. His resurrection chamber exploded one day during one of Urte's more ambitious sessions. The explosion ripped through Squee, but of course, he was fine. Urte, on the other hand, was not. Free of his captors, Squee made his way back to Dominaria and lived a full life of wonder and death, free of the consequences of his actions. The little goblin grew carefree, and he eventually became a king. Challenging the cruel leader of a goblin horde of the mountains to a duel, the evil tyrant punched at Squee to no avail, literally collapsing and dying of exhaustion in the attempt to kill Squee. Taking the throne, Squee was a gentle and compassionate leader, putting the lives of his followers first and foremost. Sadly, Squee's luck would run out as Phyrexia invaded Dominaria a second time. He found Phyrexian sleeper agents had taken over most of his goblin population, and even his old torturer, Urte, had been resurrected. Urte came to claim Squee once again. This time, however, rather than kill the goblin, he completed Squee, giving him the augmentations of a Phyrexian, tied with his immortality. He would become a powerful tool for the invasion, but thankfully, his lucky toy still had some miracles left in it, as a series of hilarious accidents led to their volcanic cave exploding. Again, killing Squee, but this time forcing Urte to retreat. Upon resurrection this time, Squee was greeted by his lucky toy in an ethereal plane. Taking a more human figure, the device revealed that it was the object responsible for tethering the goblin's soul to his ever-resurrecting body. Now it appeared to Squee to offer him a choice. He has lived a very long life, a fate he did not ask for. He could choose now to be resurrected again, free of the Phyrexian corruption and continue to live. Or if he was so tired of life, the relic could end it here and now. Squee instead took a third option of his own design. He asked to be resurrected, free of the Phyrexian influence, but this would be the final time. His next death would be his last. Now Squee could live out his days with the thrill of life that he had once so cherished. The Goblins of the Runeveld are some of the most ferocious and bloodthirsty of Dominaria, having complete control over the mountains within over 30 different goblin tribes calling this range their home. The only saving grace for the surrounding human settlements was that the goblins were just too aggressive even towards their own kind to mount any sort of real warband against them. Infighting, power struggles, and civil war kept their ambitions in check. Still, with so many goblin mines located in one place, loads of innovations surprised this humble race. They made use of rock sleds, siege equipment, and even developed complex social constructs, with several attempts at a unified governmental body. But to lead so many goblins would take individuals with great strength, conviction, and leadership qualities. Eventually, this would lead to the rise of Pashelik Mons, the first chief of Runeveld, who led his goblin raiders to attack the humans of Olesia. After his demise, years would pass without another strong enough to command the helm of goblin supremacy. That was until Pashelik's descendant followed in his ancestors' footsteps. Rulik Mons quietly and strategically gained power across the tribes of Runeveld, uniting 9 of the clans under a single banner, something almost unheard of in goblin society. He band them together under a simple idea, that they, goblins, could finally have something to brag about and barter with when leveraging in talks and negotiations with dragons. Long had the goblins run on the bottom of the totem pole, but with Phyrexia invading Dominaria yet again, they could be the first to join the fray of the plane's defense. They could join the war effort before the Viashino, even before the almighty dragons themselves. If they showed this courage, they could use it during negotiations with their betters, finally giving them a hand they could play in diplomacy. This, the promise of future riches, Rulik Mons, Warren Chief, would lead the 9 tribes of Runeveld goblins to join the new coalition, leading the fight against New Phyrexia. Though not truly a goblin, Rosnakit stands as a legendary kobold of the Kur Ridges, a descendant of a long line of proud people who live to serve their god and pillage in his name. Kobolds may not be goblins, but they are goblin-like, small, ferocious, tribalistic people who live deep within the mountains of Dominaria. Though individually weak, they make up a large and formidable community that swarm over villages and through sheer strength and numbers, take whatever would please their god, the dragon Prosh. Prosh is a true tyrant of the Kur Mountains. His wings beat with fire that burns all who displease him. The kobolds here worship Prosh as a god, though the dragon regularly devours scores of their people daily. They willingly offer themselves to Prosh in the hopes that they will spare their families' lives. But of course, Prosh pays no mind to tribute's requests. In their religious worship of Prosh, the holy tenet is to act in a way befitting the dragon, pillaging and terrorizing just as their god does. In doing this, they hope to be reborn as an offspring of Prosh. One day, the kobold Roga wasn't content with just acting like Prosh. He wanted to become a god just like the dragon. So he brutally took control of the kobolds at Kur Ridge, becoming a tyrant who then terrorized his own people, just as Prosh did. His bloody rule would end thanks to his children. His son, Ragkra, believed what his father was doing was sacrilegious to Prosh and wanted to return to the old ways of pillaging other villages, not just their own people. His daughter, Rosnakat, also stood against her father, but also the rule of Prosh. In deposing Roga, it was Rosenket who wrestled control of the kobolds from her family. Now, she looks to depose a god, to free the kobolds of Kur Ridge from their draconic tyrant. Dominaria is a plane closely tied to some of the strongest dragons found in MTG history. From the Dragon to the original Elder Dragons, it's a world almost defined by its relationship with these powerful creatures. Birthed from the Elder Dragons, the primeval dragons were some of the most influential beings, for good or bad, across Dominaria. Rith, known as the Awakener, is an evil dragon who had terrorized mortals for years under the guise of dragon supremacy, and a prophecy that would see all of the primeval dragons become gods. Hatched from the elder dragon Palladia Mors, Rith is the sister of Daragaz, one of the only primeval dragons looking to defend the denizens of Dominaria. Rith is a green dragon who believes her strength and that of her kin gives the primeval dragons the right, nay the obligation, to rule over the lesser races of the plane. This tyrannic rule of course puts Rith at odds with many other powerful beings of Dominaria, including those who would finally lock her away, the powerful wizards known as the Numina. They coalesced their magic and imprisoned Rith within a giant Magnagoth, a treefolk named Namada, charged with watching over the dragon for all time. Rith and her brother Daragaz have always had conflicting views and often butt heads on their duty to Dominaria. Rith was willing to sacrifice even other mortal dragons in order to fulfill the goals of her and her brethren, a line Daragaz would never cross. Though Daragaz would be manipulated, corrupted, and eventually killed and reincarnated several times over their history, Rith remained singularly focused on freeing the other primeval dragons and enacting their godly rule over Dominaria, with total disregard to the lives of mortals. With Daragaz's latest resurrection and dedication to serving as Dominaria's protector, along with the lesser dragons under his flight, a recaptured Rith has freed herself yet again from treefolk who imprisoned her in Urborg. Her mental connection to Daragaz proving a powerful motivator in reawakening the primeval dragon. No matter her plans now, Dominaria is made less safe with her reappearance. Serving as Rith's prison and warden, Namada is a powerful Magnagoth treefolk and lord of his people. Growing in Yavimaya, Namada was one, if not the, tallest treefolk in the forest. It was his size that caught the interest of the Numina, a council of wizards looking to imprison the primeval dragons who were terrorizing Dominaria. Using their magic to enhance the bark of Namada, the giant Magnagoth grabbed Rith within its roots and buried their evil in a slumber deep within its boughs. Rith first escaped her warden's grasp when Daragaz was tricked into fulfilling an ancient prophecy that would see the primevals return to Dominaria. This breach of justice so angered Namada that the treefolk vowed to return Rith to confinement no matter the cost. In freeing itself from Yavimaya, Namada took other Magnagoths to Urborg to recapture the rogue primeval dragon. And finally tracking down its quarry, Namada wrenched Rith from the sky and imprisoned her once again. However, history has a cruel way of repeating itself, and again Rith was freed. As is his eternal duty, Namada again seeks Rith to bring her down to his roots so that Dominaria could again be spared the dragon's cruelty. The Viashino of Dominaria are a subservient race to the dragons who dominate the sky. Loosely related to true dragons because of their lineage connection to the Ur-Dragon, Viashino often assume the role of worshippers of powerful dragons and look to gather relics and tributes to their overlords. In the sand of the Jamura Desert, the dragons of this hot, arid territory have waged war over limited resources against mortal races for centuries. While some groups have promised endless war against the dragons, a Viashino warlord managed to broker a lasting peace between his tribe and these powerful beings. This was the first one to claim the title of the Claw, the Viashino Xyrillian. With this agreement, Xyrillian would essentially gain the respect of many lesser dragons, who, under his brilliant leadership, followed his command into several battles, leading to great prosperity for both the dragons and Viashino. This piece now continues with the latest to assume the title, Ravaz of the Claw. In this new age of cooperation between mortal races and dragons, the Viashino had joined the Council of Shiv, led by the primeval dragon, Daragaz. They join alongside other races of the surrounding regions, including the humans of the Gitu, Goblins, and lesser dragonflights. Ravaz of the Claw now looks to strengthen the alliance between the Viashino and dragons, fighting together against the second Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria. While Daragaz works tirelessly to unite the races of Shiv in mutual respect and protection, there are those dragons who find the mere notion of cooperation with these lesser beings revolting, such as the Bladewing brood led by Rorik Bladewing. Once a great champion of Shiv, this dragon saw a stark fall from grace as they were blinded by their own pride and devotion to the lands believed to be his by right. When parts of Shiv were lost to Teferi's phasing spell, the broken Rorik looked to regain his honor in the fighting pits as a Colosseum gladiator. The dragon would lose his life in one of these bouts. A truly sad end to a creature obsessed with power and status. But the world was not yet done with the Bladewings. A necromancer working with the pit bosses thought that the dragon was too alluring of a fighter to lose to death. So he was resurrected, now known as the Risen, or the Deathless Tyrant. The Bladewing brood still exists alongside their undead progenitor, Rorik's descendant, Varix, looks to regain some of their flight's honor in destroying her undead father, but Varix's own child has been proclaimed the pride of the Bladewing's xenophobic ideals. Cunning and bloodthirsty, Karok's Bladewing looks to uphold his grandfather's beliefs and overthrow Daragaz to bring an end to his accursed Shivan Council. Sheoldred is a praetor of New Phyrexia, making her one of the strongest individual Phyrexians known throughout the multiverse. She was the leader of the Black Line Phyrexians in the war against Mirrodin, skulking about her dark domain of the Dross Pits. She led a group of powerful beings known as the Seven Steel Thrains, a warlord council working under Sheoldred's command, but all vying for their own stake in power. Sheoldred's unique among the Phyrexians because of her greed and ambition, setting her in stark comparison with the traditional all-is-one mentality generally prescribed to Phyrexian culture. Sheoldred and each of her 7 Thrains worked together, but also secretly and separately tried to obtain personal power at any cost, each trying to become the next father or mother of machines, the unquestioned ruler of New Phyrexia. In the grand design of the plane, Sheoldred, known as the Whispering One because of her slow, low-grinding voice, her purpose was to ensure and force loyalty from the former Mirrans who were newly Phyrexianized. She was the primary slaver of the populace. All would serve New Phyrexia, and those unwilling would be made to serve. While Elish Norn coalesced power, Sheoldred stood firm in her defiance, thus her domain was laid to waste. It's unclear how Sheoldred reacted to this in the moment, but looking at her involvement in Dominaria United, it looks like the Whispering One was, in one way or another, also made to serve. In Sheoldred's invasion of Dominaria, she commanded the largest force of Phyrexians outside of New Phyrexia. Using her unique body plan, with a torso that could easily be implanted and reinstalled on different lower body parts, Sheoldred slithered her way throughout all of Dominaria's kingdoms with the implementation of sleeper agents, showing off her keen sense of espionage and subtlety to achieve a goal. She weakened the greatest nations of Dominaria. She completed Ajani Goldmane. She resurrected the fallen Phyrexian Urte. Her dragon engine body toppled the Mana Rig. And ultimately, she accomplished her goal of capturing Karn and destroying his weapon, the Silex, before it could be used against them on New Phyrexia. Urte was once a promising mage, a student of the prestigious Tolaria Academy, an apprentice under the famously powerful mage Baron. When the original Weatherlight crew were in need of a mage to channel a spell that would allow them to travel to and attack the Phyrexian outpost Plane of Wrath, their captain Sisse first tried to recruit Baron. Refusing the position, Baron offered his most talented apprentice, as it was Urte who joined the Weatherlight crew. Aboard the airship, the young mage was regularly put down for being too young and perhaps inexperienced enough to join in this sensitive mission. He constantly had to prove himself to Sisse and the others. Luckily, he was as good as Baron promised, and he was able to detect the multiversal coordinates to Wrath into the skyship's plane-shifting power stone and got the heroes to their destination. Wrath, however, was a dangerous place, and the Phyrexians had a corrupted airship of their own, known as the Predator. The Weatherlight would routinely engage in aerial combat with the Predator, and in one dogfight, their plane shift power stone would become damaged. Luckily, Urte was able to hold a planar portal open for his allies as a means to escape. Sadly, the young mage would be left behind as the Weatherlight sustained significant damage and needed to quickly outmaneuver the Predator through the portal. Urte was left behind, feeling betrayed behind enemy lines. Urte was captured and taken to the Stronghold, the seat of Phyrexian power on the artificial staging grounds of Wrath. It was ruled over by the Evenkar, the commander of the forces, Volrath. While Urte attempted to escape numerous times, this gnawing sense of betrayal continued to eat away at him as he watched power-hungry Phyrexians fight over leadership. Eventually, Urte would become completed by the Evenkar Krovax, who then gifted him with the immortal goblin Squee, so that he could delight in killing the goblin in increasingly gruesome ways. However, it was this gift to the newly Phyrexianized leader of the Wrath forces that would spell the untimely demise of Urte, as an accidental explosion with Squee's resurrection chamber resulted in a blast that tore apart Urte's body. That was the last we heard of Urte until Dominaria United, when his remains were retrieved by Sheoldred and he was reconstructed, Now a powerful Phyrexian mage, his hatred for Dominaria and his former crew still exists, as seen in his completion of Squee's entire clan. Under Sheoldred's orders, Urte now stands as the resilience of New Phyrexia, as hatred continues to drive his every action, including almost ripping Karn limb from limb. Rona was once a promising artificer and scholar of the Tolarian Academy, though in her education she believed her professors were holding her back, keeping true knowledge for themselves, threatened by her talents. She went in search of forbidden lore, which led her to be obsessed with the Phyrexians, seeking out everything she could learn about their first invasion of Dominaria. She joined the secret society of Mishra, devout Phyrexian sympathizers who believe that the merging of metal and flesh is the only way to bring about perfection. Her fascination with Gix, a Thran rebel who perfected himself by grafting together inorganic material, becoming a Phyrexian demon, led her to do the same madness to herself, replacing various body parts, most notably her eye, with highly efficient machinery. Wanting to uncover more of the Phyrexians' teachings, Rona traveled to the caves of Koilos, the entry point of their first invasion. In seeking artifacts, Rona stumbled upon the twisted smoking ruins that turned out to be the praetor Sheoldred, injured by her travels to Dominaria. In finding a god to worship, Rona devoted herself to restoring Sheoldred, corrupting others of Dominaria, and leading an effort to restore her body using old Thran artifacts. Rona stood by Sheoldred's side as her number 2 in the second Dominaria invasion. She successfully restored Sheoldred, led the staging ground of the invasion, bested Karn in combat, and even piloted a dragon engine in an attack against the Elves of Yavimaya. Yet, in that fight against Joda and Miria, Rona was injured by a dampening sphere blast, and her current status is unknown. Elas Il-Kor is a Kor who had been exiled from her homeland and left wandering the ruins of Dominaria seeking meaning and purpose. Her people, the Kor, are a humanoid race similar to humans with lighter skin and stud-like growths on parts of their bodies. The Il-Kor at the end of Elas's name actually refers to the subsect of her race of the same name. The Kor of Dominaria, in some stories, were actually refugees from other worlds, a consequence of the Rathi overlay. When Phyrexia invaded Dominaria, they layered the reality of their staging ground, the Plane of Wrath, over top the reality of Dominaria, essentially teleporting their entire army over the plane. Because of this, many of the sentient non-Phyrexian species that were being kept on Wrath too made this journey. This included the Kor. The Il-Kor refer to those who actually got trapped between planes, never fully making the jump and being left in a strange incorporeal state for many years. Once they finally regained their bodies, their time in the Blind Eternities jaded them, and so they considered themselves distinct from the other Kor. Elas Il-Kor was angsty even to her brethren, so much so that she was unwelcome in Kor society. Spelunking an ancient Rathi ruin, a relic of the overlay, she came upon a strange jar and opened it, releasing its contents, glistening oil. With just one touch, she was assailed by visions and whispers of a perfected world, and the coming of Sheoldred. From that moment, Elas pledged her loyalty to the Phyrexian cause. She was indeed completed, but her mind wasn't bent to the will of Phyrexia, choosing to serve them willingly. Her mission was to procure a powerful artifact, a ring containing the soul and magic of Limdal, a necromancer who terrorized Dominaria's past. Though she commanded strong Phyrexian horrors and war machines, they weren't enough to best the planeswalker Liliana Vess, who defended the ring and kept it out of enemy hands. The skyship Weatherlight may be the single most important artifact in all of Dominarian history. Crafted by Urza to carry and ultimately be the tip of the legacy weapon, Weatherlight has been piloted by some of the greatest heroes of the Plains lore, and has seen more adventures than we could ever comprehend. It was pivotal in the defense of Dominaria, and led the final assault on Yawgmoth himself, launching a devastating blast from the legacy that tore through the Phyrexian god. After that heroic act, the skyship was flung from the air, crashing into the waters surrounding Urborg. But whenever Dominaria is in danger, there's no greater vessel we turn to lead us into battle. With the Cabal on the rise, the artificer Jaya took the opportunity to fish the Thran frame of the Weatherlight from the sea and restore the great skyship. Helming as its captain and establishing a modern crew, it ferried legends and planeswalkers on several missions that concluded with the defeat of the demon lord Belzenlock. Jaya has since retired as the Weatherlight's captain, leaving it in the capable hands of Captain Shanna, descendant of the original pilot, Sisay. With the Phyrexians again invading Dominaria, there was no way the Weatherlights wouldn't play a role in the plane's defense. The skyship played more of a support function for the early parts in the invasion, ferrying fighters for the new coalition to the front lines, transporting supplies, and undertaking covert missions to smuggle technology and enemy information through Phyrexian territory. In a cunning move, Captain Shana used Phyrexian debris to disguise the Weatherlight while traveling behind enemy lines. For that function, the hanging wires and dripping black ooze served its purpose. But unbeknownst to the crew, the corruption of Phyrexia was slowly seeping into every crevice of the Weatherlight. The skyship had been completed, and now sailed for the enemy, its hull covered by Phyrexians. Shana and her crew managed to escape, taking the ship's Power Stone core with them. But at the Battle of the Mana Rig, the now completed Weatherlight fought against the new coalition. It was last seen in a dogfight against Daragaz and his dragon allies, with its ultimate fate left unknown. Shana Sisay, descendant of the former Weatherlight captain known simply as Sisay, is a strong, ambitious, and independent member of the skyship's crew. She carries with her two lasting reminders of her ancestors' great accomplishments on Dominaria, wielding the original Sisay's weapons and carrying on her family's unique immunity to magical attacks. Sisay's line, much like House Capuchin, were genetically altered thanks to the planeswalker Urza's Bloodline project, his attempt to engineer great warriors that would match up against the Phyrexians if and when they decided to attack. For the Sisay line, they included a biological immunity to most spells, as their skin is interlaced with wards unseen by the eye. What we know for sure is that spells like Fireball bounce off with not so much as a hiss for its efforts. Essentially, the spells fizzle. Jaya, when first constructing a new crew for the newly restored Weatherlight, felt nostalgic and wanted both a Capuchin and a Sisay on board as members. Shana had heard tales of her ancestors' great adventures upon the vessel for all of her life, and jumped at the chance to forge her own stories aboard that very skyship. She was integral in ending the rising power of the Cabal on Dominaria, and was even granted the title of Captain of the Weatherlight for her heroism and keen leadership ability. Jaya stepped down, and now Shana helms the wheel. While undergoing smuggling raids during the second Phyrexian invasion, Shana and her crew investigated a possible Phyrexian war machine, but instead found the nightmarish apparition of braids. While helping to free the Dementia Mage, Shana was shocked to find that her greatest nightmare was made a reality, as the Weatherlight had become fully completed by the poison of Phyrexia. She has lost her skyship, but not her fighting spirit. The ageless innovator Jaya has seen Dominaria through some of its darkest hours. She started her unnaturally long life as a student of Urza's at the Tolarian Academy, with a unique knack for understanding relics, mechanics, and schematics. She was very intelligent and a successful student, becoming one of the most influential artificers of the plane, one that would go on to be a strong defender of Dominaria during the events of the first Phyrexian invasion. Growing up as a close friend to both Teferi and Karn, Jaya became immortal by accident thanks to a slow time bubble created by Teferi. While technically not ageless, Jaya ages at such a slow rate that it's undetermined just how long her life may have been extended. Barring some accident, it may be centuries, though Jaya never made it a habit avoiding dangerous situations. Such is the life of one of the most ambitious inventors of Dominaria. As a friend, Jaya is second to none. Teferi lost his Planeswalker spark some time ago in closing time rifts that threatened the plane. It was Jaya who motivated and encouraged the Time Age to reignite that lost spark. Her and Karn both share the grief of losing their mutual friend, Venzer, something that both challenges and strengthens their bond. She even managed to fish out and restore the skyship Weatherlight, serving as its pilot for some time before relinquishing the reins to Shana Sisay. In her quote-unquote retirement, Jaya has retreated to her workshop at the Mana Rig, an ancient Thran development facility where she continues to experiment with the lost technology of this forgotten kingdom. In the fight against Phyrexia's second invasion, she helped lead the new coalition into battle, building mana cannons and leading the Alliance's bombardment of the enemy. She even fashioned a self-destruct feature for the Mana Rig, to keep it out of Phyrexian control. Joda's story on Dominaria is as long as his life has been. Being over 4,000 years old, the Archmage Eternal has certainly seen his fair share of adventures. Being born an average boy to a wealthy family, his first ties to greatness come from his lineage, his family being distant relatives to Urza and Mishra. He grew up practicing magic and aspiring to become a renowned mage. But this was during a time of religious zealotry that persecuted magic users. Despite this, he would go on to study at the Tolarian academies and became a master of all 5 colors of mana. 3 major events would go on to define Joda. The first would be the gifting of a magic mirror that could store one's memories from his former mentor. The next would be his discovery of a font of magical youth, where he bathed daily unbeknownst to the effects it had on his body. Lastly would be his blooming friendship and on-again, off-again relationship with the pyromancer Jaya Ballard, who he had come to truly love and respect. While the fountain gifted Joda with eternal youth, the consequences of a long life took their toll on the mage's mind. He lived so long that he was granted the title Archmage Eternal, but also had to suffer through seeing all of his friends and loved ones pass away over the years. To keep himself sane, Joda used his magic mirror to store his memories and essentially reset himself, removing important attachments, freeing him from despair. As a character, Joda has always been a mage who sowed for peace, and used his prominent position to foster powerful alliances and end conflicts between nations. He, along with Jaya Ballard, played important roles in the formation of New Argive, something the pair again would tackle before the second Phyrexian invasion as they worked together to end a dispute between Benalia and Keld. In witnessing his dear friend Jaya killed in battle, a broken Joda again feels the weight of his long life. He may go back to Tolaria West to continue his lectures, or perhaps the Mage of Peace is ready to do more on Dominaria. While not a hero in its own right, the artifact known as the Silex, or Golgothian Silex, would be the tool used by heroes to end the threat of New Phyrexia, not only on Dominaria, but throughout the multiverse. That is, if fate had just been a bit kinder. The origins of this ornate bowl are still very much a mystery, but its design and age suggests that it could be of the Thran Empire, while some argue it could even predate them. The glyphs and markings that circle the copper-like surface of the bowl read out a phrase roughly translated to say, quote, "Wipe the land clear, bring the ending, topple the empires to bring a fresh start, call the end, fill with memories of the land," end quote. Though many scholars pored over the artifact to learn its meaning and purpose, it wasn't until the genius mind of Urza that its true power was unlocked. Urza was in a war against his brother Mishra, the Brothers' War, where Mishra was completed by Phyrexians and led an offensive to weaken Dominaria for their arrival. Urza used the Silex as his final gambit, a way of ending the threat no matter the cost. And the cost of using the Silex was substantial. The lands of an entire continent were reduced to rubble, both Urza and Mishra's armies wiped from existence. The Silex blast was so massive that it changed the climate of Dominaria for hundreds of years, bringing about the Ice Age. After its use, the Silex was believed to be destroyed, but it was later uncovered by Karn, who found it buried deep beneath Yavimaya and guarded over by the forest guardian, Multani. Karn took the Silex and intended to use its power again on New Phyrexia, ending them on their home plane. But he didn't understand how Urza first activated it. This is why he traveled to the caves of Koilos and found ancient tablets depicting the artifact's use. He wasn't able to finish his research, however, as the Phyrexian second invasion began and the enemy were able to crush the Silex, destroying it before it could be used against them. Now, with the rough notes Karn had made from what he learned in the caves, Teferi looks to travel back in time to unlock how it was used, so that he and other heroes can carry on with Karn's plan and use the Silex against New Phyrexia. Though unoperational, the talented planeswalker and artificer, Saheeli Ray, managed to reconstruct the Silex based on the notes provided. With this replica and Teferi's time traveling, there still may be hope for the multiverse. Zur is a very curious case. Born during the time of the Ice Age, Zur was a gifted mage who was obsessed with gaining immortality. Because of his insane experiments and dangerous attempts, Zur was exiled from his home of Keldor, which would later become part of New Argive. Zur wandered the icy wastes and gained followers who were driven just as mad as their master. This cult would set out and attack Keldor, but would suffer defeat thanks to the mage who actually did unlock the secrets of immortality, Joda, which most certainly tore at Zur's ego. As the Ice Age ended, he and his followers had to escape the rising waters of the Flood Age and desperately sought help from their former enemies, the Keldorans. Though insane and unpredictable, the first King Darren let them in as powerful mages who would go on to support the formation of New Argive, making them some of the first magic users of this new kingdom. His followers claim Zur unlocked a version of immortality while alone in the ice, though it's not as elegant as Joda's, as Zur's body seems to be distorted. His mind, however, riddled with madness, remained unchanged. Zur would abandon his more aggressive pursuits and drop all claims of hostility and arrogance, essentially cutting himself off from all earthly responsibilities. He no longer led a cult of crazy spellcrafters. In humbling himself, Zur even approached Joda for a job as a professor at Tolarian West. Though suspicious, Joda agreed, but keeps a watchful eye on Zur. Lord Windgrace was once a powerful Leonin planeswalker who was a native to Urborg before its corruption by the Phyrexians. In life, Windgrace was noted as a powerful spellcaster and skilled fighter who always defended his home from threats. This is why when Urza planned an offensive mission against the Phyrexians on their home plane, that he approached Windgrace and asked him to join them. Believing Phyrexia to be the greatest threat to Urborg, Windgrace agreed. This was the formation of the Nine Titans, 9 planeswalkers who piloted mech suits that would invade Phyrexia. Their mission was to plant bombs and destroy the plane before it invaded Dominaria. That mission sadly failed thanks to a betrayal from one of the other Titans. Many planeswalkers died on Phyrexia, with Windgrace being one of the few to make it back to Dominaria. During the Rift Crisis saga, where tears in space and time threatened to undo Dominaria, Windgrace sacrificed his planeswalker spark and life in order to close the rift appearing above Urborg. Before he died, Windgrace enchanted the land with his essence, vowing that, even in death, his spirit would be tied to Urborg and would protect it from all who would do it harm. A spell that seemingly worked, as the force of Windgrace lingers in Urborg to this day. With Phyrexia again using this land to peddle their corruption, the soul of Windgrace again stirs and looks to defend his home. Sol Kanar was once a benevolent nature spirit tied to the forests of Kone. He appeared as a Maros sorcerer who helped to foster the forest's health and grew magnificent biodiversity. Though he would run afoul of an evil planeswalker who worked to taint the nature spirit into her evil champion. This was the will of Greydon Dihada. Dihada recognized the power this spirit possessed, and twisted the mana coursing through its veins to corruption, replacing green mana with those of black and red. Sol Kanar became tainted. The spirit and Dihada bent the forest to match the now demented mind of its guardian, raising the waters and turning it into a swamp, with Sol Kanar declaring himself Swamp King. He ruled over all who called this forest their home, and demanded tributes from neighboring kingdoms as he saw himself as a god of these lands and expected that treatment in kind. Dihada used Sol Kanar as her dark champion in her endless campaign to end the kingdom of Corondor and extinguish the line of Carthalion, who have impeded her schemes of power for generations. Though the original soul of Sol Kanar still may linger under the rot of the swamp, the current tainted version enjoys the evil of his rule. Legend says if Dihada is ever finally vanquished, perhaps Sol Kanar and the forest he once protected may be restored. Braids is a powerful member of the Cabal, a demon-worshipping cult that's been a thorn in the side of Dominaria for much of its recent history. Known as Braids because of her hairstyle, she also goes by Fula and Bara, but no matter what you call her, many would simply call her Mad. As a dementia mage, Braids dabbled in dark powers that would drive other spellcasters insane. She fed off the nightmares of her enemies, turned their darkest horrors into realities, all while maintaining a shocking degree of lucidity, something not often seen in this discipline, and adding to the evidence that Braids was a particularly strong mage. Dementia magic was used by the Cabal in their fighting pits, organized underground fights to the death which helped provide the cult with income to fund their various demon-worshipping escapades. Braids was more than willing to join the Cabal and implement her skills, winning her great wealth and prominence within the cult. Through her adventures as a member of the cult, she enjoyed the trust and appointments of their leader known as the Patriarch, and would later assume leadership of the Cabal in the wake of their devastation at the hands of godly forces, namely the powerful avatar, Corona. Though her reign as Cabal leader would be short, as her trifling with nightmares would soon get the better of her. She would find herself betrayed by her magic, and trapped within Dementia Space, a reality removed from Dominaria inhabited by nightmares. There, Braids lingered, with many of the Cabal assuming that she had died. She remained trapped until the start of the second Phyrexian invasion, when the crew of the Weatherlight were tracking down Phyrexian supplies and came across a shadowy figure looking for help. Shauna, the ship's captain, agreed to help the desperate soul, assisting Braids in destroying a shard version of herself that kept her tied to the nightmares of Dementia Space. And fighting through their own nightmares, the Weatherlight crew were successful in destroying the Braid shard and freeing the original, who now was a physical nightmare herself, thanks to her prolonged exposure in this realm. She now intends to lead the Cabal again, and bring about their golden age on Dominaria. Someone less enthusiastic about Braid's return to Cabal leadership is the dark shaman known simply as Lagomos, Hand of Hatred. Before the summoning of Braids from the depths of Dementia Space, all the stars seemed aligned to finally elevate Lagomos to his rightful place in charge of the Cabal. He had managed to survive the reign of Belzenlach before those damn planeswalkers killed him, and he had single-handedly, so he says, stopped the organization from completely crumbling in the demon's absence. He now takes his orders from a deranged construct of pure fear, Braids, which is somehow even worse than the Cabal's previous leadership. While he may grovel and kneel for now, it's nothing more than a temporary situation, while he waits for his schemes to come to fruition. Soon, the Cabal will finally be in Lagomos' hands. Zar Ojenin carries a name of legend on Dominaria, as well as the responsibility of her ancestors' duty to her people. A Leonin of the desert oasis, Ifrava, Zar witnessed the destruction of her paradise to an unknown calamity that saw the sands of the desert swallow up her beloved home. The very home her Leonin brethren and ancestors once fought and died to keep safe and free. She is the descendant of the great Jedet Ojenin, a fierce Leonin mercenary who pledged to find out who murdered his father and avenge him. In doing so, he became one of the most famous mercenaries Dominaria had ever seen, never shying away from a fight, using his agility and cunning to best even the most talented and trained swordsmen who stood in his path. Years later, his same talents still linger in Dominaria through his descendant, Zar, who has vowed to keep her people safe even as they now travel the sands in a giant caravan looking for a lasting home. Even as Phyrexians look to skitter from the drifting dunes, Zar will never let the hopeful light of Ifrava fade from Dominaria. Urg is a hulking frog who devours all those who cross his path, but his legacy on Dominaria is not nearly as impressive as that of the frog who spawned Urg, Turg. Turg was a wild giant frog beast that was captured and brutally trained to be the warrior companion of the merfolk Laquatus, who acted as an ambassador, but more corrupt than anyone could possibly realize. Because of their forced mental connection that allowed Laquatus to call Turg whenever he needed, the frog grew in intelligence, becoming self-aware and even learning spells. Though the pair acted as ambassadors to the Cephalid Empire, their true aim was in obtaining the Mirari artifact, an orb that promised to grant any wish of the bearer, but far too often those wishes came with unforeseen consequences. Using Turg, Aquatus managed to track down the Mirari, but overplayed his hand in chasing it through a vault full of enemy guards also looking to obtain the relic. Their enemies summoned a giant squid that battled the pair, with Turg ultimately sacrificing his life for his bonded companion, as the squid tore the frog apart with its beak. Since his death, the Cabal had found Turg's final clutch of eggs, and hoped to hatch them into a new line of frog beasts to use in their fighting pits. One of the tadpoles, however, escaped, becoming its own frog, now known as Urg. The Raven Man is a figure of some dispute, a phantom, a lingering emotional response, a consciousness given form. No one could be certain, but for the person the Raven Man tormented, he appeared all too real, as the Necromancer Planeswalker, Liliana Vess, struggled with the constant interfering of the Raven Man throughout her life. I've completed a video highlighting the Raven Man's story in Dominaria United, as well as adding some backstory for context, so you can watch it here or linked in the description below. In short though, the Raven Man is in fact the lingering spirit of a great necromancer of Dominaria, the first to master death, Limdal. Limdal is a character who has plagued the plane with his machinations throughout history, all in the pursuit of ultimate power and immortality. In that, Limdal found that it was possible to pass down his essence to other strong mages, collectively adding their power to his each time he entered a new vessel. This was through a ring that stored his essence. Liliana Vess was the next in line to become Limdal's vessel. From a young age, the Raven Man helped to guide a young Liliana down the road of becoming the most powerful necromancer throughout the multiverse. It was the Raven Man who first taught her death magic, who tempted her to abandon all emotional connections with others, who guided her to the Chain Veil and increased her power, who protected her from dangerous threats that could end her life, although that was more for selfish reasons. Liliana herself would finally uncover the true identity of the Raven Man. Although Limdal is still tied to the Planeswalker, she has formally rejected his gift, the ring that would make her his vessel. Another powerful necromancer of Dominaria, the Lich Ratad Rabik, is known as the most powerful death mage of the plane. Residing in a ramshackle castle in the swamps of Urborg, this Lich has outlived every other Lich that tried to dominate the dead of Dominaria. He is all that remains, and he seeks to expand his throne across all those buried beneath these marshy lands. He has survived numerous apocalypses, heroes looking to strike him down, 2 Phyrexian invasions, the collapse of time itself. There's no one left to claim this isn't his right. There is one, however, who looks to undo all the slaving he's been doing to the dead of Urborg, the pesky spirit speaker named Moira. She was once another powerful necromancer, bound by her human form, and like Ratad Rabik, she was obsessed with binding the dead to her will. That is, until one day, a spell of hers backfires, and Moira herself became a forlorn spirit of the marsh. Seeing the error of her ways and how she tormented the souls of the dead, Moira has vowed to free all those dead who linger in the swamp, putting her in direct confrontation with the Lich of Urborg. The two now struggle against one another, Ratad Rabik shackling the newly dead to his will, and Moira working diligently to free them. Najal is not a native of Dominaria. This Ifrit hails from the sharded plane of Rabia, known as the Infinite Expanse. This plane of myth and legend is home to a number of great Ifrit and Jinn who have both brought blessings and curses upon the infinite possibilities that is this fragmented plane. Najal, being a storm runner for her Ifrit tribe, was once challenged to a race. Not looking to be outran, Najal summoned all of their power and ran faster than ever before, bending space and the blind eternities around them, before opening their eyes again in a great desert unfamiliar to them. Najal has literally run through the blind eternities, now trapped on Dominaria, unsure if she can recreate the feat and return home. Ivy has been a thorn in the side of the Tolarian administration for many, many years. A mischievous fairy, Ivy's self-stated purpose in life is to, quote, keep people humble. Many an overconfident first year has found their spell snatched out of midair, with only an irritating giggle left in its place. Vortok Bone Rattle is one of the last of Dominaria's trolls. A naturally gifted necromancer, he seeks a path to true resurrection. Not for himself, but for his nearly extinct species. To this end, he has no qualms about using the bodies that populate his swamp as servants and guardians. And there you guys go, every single legendary creature in Dominaria United explained. Their stories, histories, and lore in case you wanted to know exactly who your next commander is. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this long journey and supporting the channel any way you see fit. You can support our content by becoming a member, just like these fine folks have, or even just by liking this video or sharing it with others, and of course becoming a subscriber. Again, I want to thank you guys all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!